Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, sir.
This is Labor Day. What are we doing here working? Were we supposed to be working on Labor Day?
We're laboring.
And the people who believe in emphasizing the labor movement, they're all out having a barbecue today. But we're going to do a little bit of job here talking about labor, and labor law always meant well to help the laboring class because they've always had to struggle. But sometimes things in government backfire. The labor movement, from my understanding, got started in the 1880s, shortly after the Civil War, and the first token demonstration or celebration was in 1882. And it wasn't long after that that Samuel Gompers got involved and created the American Federation of Labor. And that's been around, and he was around for a long time in the labor movement. And he saw a need to help labor because we were moving into the industrial world. So, but I found something interesting about Samuel Gompers that was fascinating to me because he actually had a monetary policy. And when he started in the labor movement, he was a gold standard person, and he modified that because of the election between William Jennings Bryan and McKinley, and because the labor wanted more inflation with silver, which is rather ironic. But he recognized that gold was a friend of labor, and unfortunately nobody believes that anymore, that sound money is a friend of labor, because, and I think you have some statistics about real labor costs and real wages, and they're not going up, and you have to understand money if you want to have real wages. But most of us know that it went along, there was a labor movement, but it really got moving in the 1930s because, of course, the interpretation was that free enterprise and the gold standard caused our depression, so therefore they had to have more intervention. As early as 1931, they had the Davis-Bacon Act, which obviously would help your friends in the military-industrial complex, to keep labor costs up artificially. But then later on, the big event in the 30s was the Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act, which set up the National Relations Board with a lot of power and a lot of mischief that they could get involved in the labor market. And this was supposed to help labor, but it really didn't solve the problem because things got worse in the Depression. The Depression was delayed, and then after the war, they decided that they had to rein in labor. But I don't think we've really learned our lesson. The time you spent with me in Washington, I was fascinated with when I first came back in '96 after having been out 12 years. I had been on banking. I walked in after 12 years and the debate was exactly the same. What are we going to do with the Davis-Bacon Act? Because that is fixing wages higher if you're working on a federal job, and price fixing isn't a very good idea.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Samuel Gompers, and there's a generally accepted wisdom today that free market people are no friends of labor. But if Gompers had his way and there was a gold standard, how would it would have helped labor?
Well, they'd have been much better off because it is the lack of the gold standard which causes, the 99 and the 1. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer because it is a monetary idea that causes these maldistribution in wages. So it would have been a lot better off. But then again, what do you do when labor seems to be mistreated, and what are you going to do about it? Of course, I believe that the freer the markets are, the higher the wage will go, and wages will go up when the production goes up. But politically, that's not an easy sell. So there's always somebody who wants to regulate, the wages.
Well, I know you've talked about this. The official statistics are, 5% unemployment, things are going great. But you've talked a lot about participation in the workforce, and we have a chart on that, which I think is dramatic.
Yeah, and we've mentioned this before because if you look at the chart on the participation rate and you go back to the year 2000, which is an important point for me in analyzing what's going on economically, and that was the NASDAQ bubble bursting. And look, that chart goes down, the participation rate. And since that time, there has been there's been a lot of unemployment added to this. Now we have 94 million people in this group, and 14 million of them came since the recession. There were 5 million new jobs, but there's still over 10 million jobs, and there's been growth and population growth, but it isn't keeping up, and the wages are not keeping up. So unfortunately, the answer right now, you hear it all the time, the fair wages and the minimum wages, and when minimum wages, years ago when they were $5 and $6 and $7, a few of us said, well, if you wanted to go to 8, why don't you take it to 15? Well, the hell, they're taking it up to 15, but now we're reading stories precisely who suffers from these laws.
And now the big thing is living wage, which is the idea that a single wage earner in a family should be able to work 40 hours a week and sustain that family in a reasonably comfortable style. And so the mandate is on the employers, the wage payers, to pay that amount. But would that really solve the plight of the worker?
No, well, it's just more mischief, and it should be decided by the market. It should vary, but probably in the Depression or earlier, they might have thought 50 hours a week would have been right. How do they know whether it's 50 or 38? As productivity goes up, people they used to have to go into the mines and work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week just to survive. But with the modern approach to the industrialization was very helpful to labor. And some people just think, oh no, we can't have this in. The machines are going to take over. And unfortunately, this artificial raising of minimum wage right now, it's allowing technology to move in and have machines automatically substitute for workers. And when they do this, if you raise wages whatever percent, 10%, say in Walmart, and they pass that on, they're going to maybe not hire as many people, but the very people who want a living wage, their wage is going to go down. Because the prices are going to go up. So it's this whole idea of the mischief. And this principle really was embedded into our system with the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Board, to set this up, and they were going to be able to dictate, and they were going to give a special privilege to unions. So if there are negotiations, since they always said the unions were mistreated, therefore they could have affirmative action. If you had 51% of a group of workers vote for a closed shop, they get it. And the 49% lost their right to negotiate their own wage. So that in itself violates the principles of liberty. And when you do that with a minimum wage, the minimum wage isn't only, what they see is, oh, somebody just made $10 an hour, now they're going to make 15. Isn't that wonderful? But what if there's a marginal worker that really wants the job, he doesn't want to go on welfare, understands the system, and he would be delighted to go to work for somebody for $8 an hour. It's prohibited. It's against the law to do this. This is what they do. They put in prohibitions and mandates thinking it will solve the problem. The labor contract is interesting to think about, because if labor gets together and they're being abused by a big corporation, they should have, the right to organize and talk and meet and ask, for changes in wages. But when the government comes in and mandates a settlement, I think is when the mistake is made. But one thing that always fascinated me is if you have an agreement between worker and business, if the laborer is not allowed to leave his contract and leave that work where he's working, he becomes a slave. You can't leave. Well, then he becomes a slave. But the way the National Labor Relations Board rules is that the businessman can't leave. So in a way, it's a type of enslavement. Interference in the contract, is the main problem. But one thing leads to another problem, because after, I think they subtly realized, the economists realized, all that mischief in the 30s wasn't doing that much good. And we had the war going on, and even though they had prevailing wages and still do, they realized that they had to balance this because the businessman was getting chopped down, and it was harmful to business. And so the Republicans got together and they had the Taft-Hartley law passed, which was trying to balance things off. And it's generally supported by conservatives and Republicans and probably some free market people because it seemed to help things, but it was nothing more than regulating the unions. See, the unions got something by the National Labor Relations Board, but they gave up their liberties, and therefore they introduced the notion that they can come down, and quite frankly, the unions aren't that strong right now, and it's part of that. But I think the hardest thing for people to adjust to is the fact that they have, you know, how will the working man be protected? Will they be? And you have to have affirmative action from the federal government to take care of. And I don't believe that. I just believe that the markets, when they're free and prosperous, there's a high demand for wages, and price controls, whether it's the price of money, like the Fed does, or whether it's the price of labor or anything else, things don't go very well.
Of course, the other side would argue that the reason things aren't going so well for the workers is there has not been enough government regulation, the same thing they say with foreign policy. But the fact is we've had now a century of government regulation of labor, and you're looking at the conditions of labor, it has not improved significantly, if at all.
Right, and they'll come back and just want more laws. And I guess under the Constitution, some of these laws wouldn't be prohibited by the Constitution. It was, you know, the states would deal with some of these problems. But the economic arguments, it just makes no sense for politicians to get involved and serve political interests, whether it's serving in interests of big companies or labor. I would say the balance right now is tremendously in favor of big financial companies and corporations like the military-industrial complex. The people who, you know, work for government companies, first they have a promised flow of cash to building weapons, and the workers are generally unionized, and their wages are quite high, but it's all artificial. It's been taken out of the economy and pumped into this special area, so businesses do quite well, and that's why, even though it might have been well intended right now, it really serves the interest, as our monetary policy does. Now, it looks to me very deliberate what our Fed does, but others would say, no, they're trying to manage the economy. But the management of the economy means that you make a lot of money in the NASDAQ and the housing bubble, and then when you go broke, the Fed bails you out, and on it goes. So I don't know if there's much to celebrate for Labor Day under the conditions we have. Of course, if you're running for political office, you have to be very, very optimistic. The world is wonderful, and let's celebrate only these one things. Labor's doing well, and business is doing well. But I don't know what your assessment would be, but I would say labor's being rather challenged this Labor Day.
Certainly, especially with the advent of automation with higher wages.
Yeah, there you go. But anyway, Labor Day is a significant event in our history for over 100 years. They have talked about it. Labor unions are struggling to maintain their power and scope. But quite frankly, in a free society, labor has the absolute right to organize and talk and negotiate and work and have tough negotiations with the businessman in a free market. But they have to prove themselves. They have to prove that they are a good organization, they can produce productive workers. And believe me, if there's a productive society, that labor is going to do well. But a lot of people think that you should put restraints on labor in order to curtail the powers that they were given. And that's where we've been for all these years. But free markets and voluntary associations can go a long way to solving this problem and get rid of all the price controls. Price controls on money and wages and minimum wages and prevailing wages and sending huge amounts of money into government-sponsored organizations like the military-industrial complex. That's all a mess, and it distorts things, and guess what? You get more poor people. And right now, that is what I see, this tremendous number of people, 94 million people out of the workforce. And if you look at the unemployment statistic, our government says, oh, it's 5.1%. It just went down, and the market says, oh, that's pretty good, you know, and they get excited about that. Not so much now as before, because you can't fool the people forever. They will have to finally buckle down and realize that things aren't that hunky-dory. Now, shadow stacks. John Williams, who runs that, says the unemployment rate is like 23 or 24%. And even a government measurement of unemployment says it's 10%. So this whole thing about fiction, it's like the CPI and the GDP, and now the unemployment statistics, it means nothing. But the people know it, and that is why the people are angry and disgruntled. And this campaign for president this year is different than ever before. And as I have said, people vote from their bellies and they get angry, upset, and fearful. And I'm afraid they'll ask for just more government rather than recognizing the government itself has been the problem. And the solution here can be found in the principles of liberty. That's what we should be working for. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.